In a quiet suburb of a bustling city in 2012, a shocking secret affair between a high school teacher and two of her students spirals out of control, leading to betrayal and murder. What starts as an escape for troubled souls ends in tragedy, leaving a community in shock and leading investigators on a hunt for the truth. This is the story of love, obsession, and murder. A story of how one young man almost got away with the perfect crime. Sarah Collins was a respected English teacher at Hillside High School. For most of her life, she had managed to keep up appearances, kind, diligent, the sort of person people might call dependable. But Sarah was deeply lonely, a feeling that seemed to have settled into her life over the years and taken root like weeds. Her marriage had ended 5 years earlier, leaving her with a gnawing sense of emptiness. Though she had no children, she had always thought teaching would fill that maternal need. But while teaching did bring her purpose, it left her wanting something more profound and personal, a connection to another person, a life that felt truly her own. Sarah's disciplined, routine life masked an inner world filled with doubts and desires. Every day she would return to her small, sparsely furnished apartment, finding solace in routines, a cup of tea, a quick walk, and grading papers into the late hours of the night. To most people, Sarah was simply a quiet, single woman who kept to herself. No one saw the vulnerability beneath her calm exterior or understood how her loneliness felt unbearable at times. For Sarah, teaching literature was a way of exploring emotions, and perhaps that was why she connected so easily with students who felt misunderstood. She had a soft spot for troubled or overlooked kids, those who seemed lost in the world. She took time with them, listening to their stories, often becoming a confidant. And while she knew her role was to guide and support from a distance, Sarah sometimes found herself wishing for a closeness that went beyond her role as a teacher. James Caldwell, L, or Jimmy as everyone called him, was the kind of boy who turned heads at school. Coming from one of the wealthiest families in the town, Jimmy's life seemed perfect on the outside. His parents, influential members of the community, expected him to follow in their footsteps, attend a top university, and eventually inherit his father's real estate business. But inside the large modern house he called home, Jimmy felt alone. His parents were absent more than present, busy with dinners, travel, and keeping up appearances. They lived under one roof, but Jimmy rarely saw them. Jimmy's room was a picture of privilege, the latest gadgets, luxury clothes, and sports equipment. But none of it mattered to him. He'd spend hours alone listening to music or going through old photos, searching for something that felt real. His friends often joked about his perfect life, but they didn't see the emptiness that gnawed at him. He longed for someone who would see him as he was, someone who cared about him for more than his family name. In Sarah's English class, Jimmy found an escape. She spoke with a sincerity that struck him, something he didn't hear often at home. She seemed genuinely interested in his thoughts, often asking about his ideas and opinions. It was a small thing, but it was something real, something he could hold on to. Over time, he found himself staying after class, asking questions about books, seeking her insight. Their conversations were innocent enough at first, discussions of literature and life, musings on the future. But to Jimmy, they were moments of connection that he couldn't find anywhere else. Danny Russo's life was a stark contrast to Jimmy's. Where Jimmy had wealth and status, Danny had struggle and hardship. His family was known around town not for success, but for their constant troubles. Danny's father was in and out of jail. His mother struggled with addiction, and their home was a revolving door of drama and tension. The Russo house was a place of chaos, filled with anger, disappointment, and broken promises. Danny learned early on that he had to fend for himself, taking on odd jobs after school to buy food or pay bills when his mother couldn't. Danny's life wasn't just difficult, it was lonely. He had few friends, and he felt isolated, looked down on by his classmates who viewed him as the kid from the wrong side of town. His grades were inconsistent, not because he lacked intelligence, but because he had more on his mind than schoolwork. Most days, he just showed up, biding his time until he could leave school and escape the judgment he felt from others. Then he met Sarah Collins. She was the only adult who seemed to see past his family and his troubles. Sarah noticed his struggles, and after class, she'd sometimes ask if he was doing all right. At first, he brushed her off, wary of people who tried to get close. But over time, Sarah's kindness wore him down. She offered him encouragement and listened when he talked about his worries and frustrations. With her, he felt a sense of stability he hadn't known before. He started to see her as his escape from the chaos of his home life, a source of comfort he never wanted to lose. As 2012 wore on, Sarah found herself at the center of two very different young men's lives, though neither knew about the other. Jimmy and Danny each represented something that Sarah was searching for but couldn't define. With Jimmy, she felt a thrill she hadn't felt in years, the rush of being needed by someone bright and full of potential. For Danny, Sarah felt a different kind of pull. She saw a soul in pain, someone she could nurture and protect. In both, she found a satisfaction that blurred the lines she had once firmly kept between teacher and student. For Jimmy, the relationship was an escape from his hollow home life, a way to feel alive. He would find reasons to stay after school, helping Sarah organize books or discussing passages from novels. He felt safe with her, safe to share his frustrations, to talk about his parents without fear of judgment. Sarah became his world, someone who saw him for more than his family's name. For Danny, Sarah was a lifeline. She offered him understanding and warmth, qualities he rarely experienced at home. He would spend time with her after school, talking about his family's struggles and his fear of becoming like his parents. For the first time, he felt that someone cared about him, not out of pity, but out of genuine concern. Sarah's small gestures, an encouraging word, a gentle smile, meant everything to him. Sarah knew her behavior was dangerous. She understood the consequences, the risks of her growing involvement with both boys. Yet, she convinced herself that she was offering them something good, a support system, a safe place to be themselves. She began to justify it, telling herself that they needed her, that she was helping them become better people. But her motivations grew tangled with her own needs, her loneliness, her craving for intimacy and connection. As spring turned to summer, Sarah found herself relying on the attention from Jimmy and Danny as much as they relied on her. She looked forward to their time together, to the feeling of importance they gave her, to the sense of thrill and fulfillment that filled the void of her solitary life. What began as moments of kindness turned into a complex and dangerous entanglement, a secret world she built around herself to escape the reality of her isolation. Without realizing it, Sarah had begun to depend on them, drawing them closer until they became part of her life in a way that felt irreversible. She believed she could manage the situation, keep control, but beneath the surface, tensions simmered, and the cracks in her carefully constructed world began to show, leaving a trail of vulnerability that neither she nor the boys were prepared to face. By late 2012, Danny's attachment to Sarah had grown into something much deeper, much darker. What had once been a quiet solace from his chaotic life had evolved into an all-consuming need. Sarah was no longer just his teacher or an occasional confidant. She was his whole world, the one person who made him feel understood and valued. Danny clung to every moment with her, each interaction filling him with a sense of security he had never felt at home. He believed that Sarah saw him for who he was, beyond his broken family and troubled reputation. To him, she was more than just a mentor or lover. She was his only escape, his savior. But with time, Danny's feelings intensified into possessiveness. He wanted all of her attention, her loyalty, and her time. He would wait around after school, lingering in hallways just to catch a glimpse of her. He grew tense whenever he saw her talking to other students or laughing with her colleagues, interpreting every interaction as a threat to their bond. He couldn't bear the thought of sharing her attention with anyone else. Slowly, Danny started pushing for more time together, often showing up unexpectedly at her home or her favorite spots in town. At first, Sarah brushed it off as a sign of his devotion, even feeling flattered by his dedication. But as his requests became more frequent, Sarah began to sense that Danny's feelings had developed into something far more intense than she was prepared to handle. Meanwhile, Jimmy remained blissfully unaware of the depth of Danny's connection with Sarah. For Jimmy, the affair was exhilarating and rebellious, a secret escape from his otherwise polished life. He saw Sarah as an adventure, a thrill that gave his days a spark of excitement he had never felt before. Being with her allowed him to momentarily forget the emptiness of his home life and the weight of his family's expectations. When they were together, Jimmy felt alive, but he never considered that his actions could have deeper, more painful repercussions for anyone involved. He was, in many ways, still just a boy, testing boundaries without any real understanding of the dangers lurking in the emotions he was stirring. Sarah's delicate balancing act between the two boys grew harder to maintain. As Danny's needs intensified, she began to feel overwhelmed by his constant presence, his frequent texts, and his deepening emotional demands. She was torn between the excitement of her time with Jimmy and the intensity of her relationship with Danny. Each boy offered her something different, but the complexity was becoming too much to handle. The burden of keeping the relationships hidden weighed on her, and she grew wary of Danny's increasingly possessive nature. She started pulling back, hoping to create some distance to regain a sense of control. But for Danny, every canceled plan, every delayed response, felt like a personal rejection, stirring feelings of abandonment and betrayal that he could not shake. Danny's jealousy reached a breaking point on January 5th, 2013. That evening, while helping Sarah with some materials after school, he accidentally saw an explicit text message on her phone from Jimmy. The sight sent a shock through him. His mind raced as he realized that Sarah had been sharing herself with someone else. The betrayal cut deep, not just because she was with another student, but because it was Jimmy, the wealthy, privileged boy who had everything Danny lacked. To Danny, this was the ultimate betrayal. Sarah, the woman he believed was his alone, had chosen to be with someone he envied, someone he felt she would never fully understand the way she understood him. The next few days were a blur of anger and heartache for Danny. He tried to confront Sarah, demanding an explanation, hoping she would deny it or tell him it was just a fleeting mistake. She attempted to calm him, explaining it as a brief fling, something that didn't mean as much as what she had with him. But the damage was done. Danny's sense of security had been shattered, replaced by a wave of bitterness and rage. The realization that he had been sharing Sarah with someone else burned inside him, feeding a resentment that would soon grow uncontrollable. As the days passed, Danny's thoughts grew darker. He found himself unable to sleep, his mind consumed by images of Sarah and Jimmy together. Every moment he replayed her betrayal in his mind. His anger only intensified. What had once been an innocent infatuation had turned into an obsession. He couldn't accept that the woman he had seen as his salvation had chosen someone else, someone he felt so deeply envious of. Each day, his resentment and jealousy festered, transforming his heartbreak into something far more dangerous. On February 17, 2013, Danny finally confronted Jimmy. It was after school, in a secluded area behind the football field where he knew no one would interrupt them. He approached Jimmy with the intention of scaring him, of warning him to stay away from Sarah. But the conversation quickly turned heated as Danny's emotions spiraled out of control. Years of anger, jealousy, and hurt erupted in an intense rage. Jimmy's casual indifference to Sarah, his dismissive attitude, only fueled Danny's fury. Before he knew it, Danny had pulled out a knife he had brought for intimidation, and in a sudden, uncontrollable impulse, he plunged it into Jimmy's chest. Jimmy's eyes widened in shock as he stumbled back, clutching his wound as he slowly crumpled to the ground. Danny stood there, heart pounding, watching Jimmy's life slip away. When it was over, he turned and ran, leaving Jimmy's body behind, his mind a blur of fear and adrenaline. The next day, on the 18th of February, Danny was still reeling from the act, struggling to process what he had done. But as he thought about Sarah, his anger reignited. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was responsible for his pain, that her betrayal had driven him to this point. Consumed by a twisted sense of betrayal and vengeance, Danny made his way to her home that night, just as darkness fell. He found her alone, catching her off guard as she opened the door. Without a word, he lunged at her, the knife in his hand once again. The attack was brutal, the culmination of his heartbreak and anger. Each stab was driven by the resentment he had held inside, the broken trust, and the hurt he believed she had caused him. When it was done, Danny felt nothing but a hollow emptiness. He quickly buried both bodies in a remote wooded area he had discovered while hiking, hoping that the secluded spot would keep them hidden from the world. The weight of his actions settled over him like a shroud, but for now he believed he had covered his tracks well enough. The two people who had shattered his world were gone, and for a brief moment he felt a twisted sense of justice, convinced he had done what was necessary to reclaim the sense of peace he had lost. March 6, 2013. It was the abandoned car that raised the first red flag. Jimmy Caldwell's pristine black luxury sedan was found on a quiet road outside town, a stark contrast to the surrounding dusty terrain. To the untrained eye, it looked like any other car left behind by a roadside, but it soon became the focus of intense scrutiny. When authorities traced the car back to Jimmy and notified his parents, panic set in. For his wealthy, influential family, the idea of Jimmy simply vanishing was unthinkable. They pressured the local police, determined to leave no stone unturned. What began as a simple search quickly escalated into a high-profile case. For days, search efforts intensified. Jimmy's face appeared on posters and in news reports, and volunteers from the community joined the police in combing the surrounding areas. But as time passed and no new leads emerged, the atmosphere grew tense, and whispers about foul play began circulating among the locals. The community, once united by a simple search for a missing teen, was now clouded by fear and speculation. March 8, 2013. Just as the investigation into Jimmy's disappearance gained momentum, another unsettling twist occurred. Sarah Collins, a dedicated teacher, failed to show up for work. Her colleagues, puzzled and concerned, reported her absence to the authorities. The school, usually bustling with routine, was abuzz with questions about where Sarah could be. She was known for her reliability, her habit of showing up every day without fail. For her to miss work entirely was not only unusual, but alarming. As detectives delved into Sarah's life, they noticed connections between her and Jimmy. There were records of Jimmy being in her English class, and whispers of an unusually close bond between them began to emerge. Teachers recalled seeing Jimmy lingering in Sarah's classroom after school, and some students hinted at a friendship that seemed to cross the boundaries of a typical teacher-student relationship. With both Jimmy and Sarah missing, the investigation took on a new, more sinister tone. March 15, 2013. The detectives working the case finally decided to question Danny Russo, a boy they knew had been close to both Jimmy and Sarah. On the surface, Danny was cooperative, answering questions with what seemed like genuine concern and confusion. He explained his friendship with Sarah as an innocent bond between a troubled student and a caring teacher. When asked about Jimmy, he shrugged, saying they hadn't been particularly close. But as the questioning continued, something felt off. Danny was visibly agitated, struggling to maintain his composure as detectives pressed him on small details. His hands fidgeted, his gaze shifted, and subtle signs of anxiety started to break through his calm demeanor. Although he feigned innocence, the detectives noted the underlying tension in his responses. They didn't have enough evidence to hold him, but they left the interview with a feeling that there was more to Danny's story. April 2nd, 2013. As the investigation stalled, Danny's confidence began to grow. He believed he had successfully hidden his involvement, that the police would eventually move on. But he couldn't escape the guilt entirely. And in a moment of recklessness, he made a crucial mistake. While chatting with a few friends, he casually mentioned details about Sarah's home. Details only someone intimately familiar with the house would know. It wasn't just the layout he described, but specific features. Things no ordinary visitor would remember. One of his friends, noticing Danny's unusual knowledge, felt uneasy and eventually passed on the information to the police. To the detectives, it was the slip they had been waiting for. They now had a reason to bring Danny in for further questioning, and this time they were determined to break through his facade. April 10th, 2013. When Danny arrived at the station for his second round of questioning, he tried to keep his cool. But as the detectives drilled him on the details of Sarah's home, his calm exterior began to unravel. He stumbled over his words, becoming defensive and visibly anxious. The detectives noticed his composure cracking as he struggled to explain how he knew so much about Sarah's private space. They kept pressing, tightening the emotional noose, hoping to make him reveal more. April 20th, 2013. Determined to uncover the truth, the police intensified their search, expanding their investigation to a remote area where Danny had once been seen hiking. After days of combing through dense woodland, they found it. A small piece of jewelry, half buried in the dirt. It was a delicate bracelet that had belonged to Sarah, unmistakable to anyone who knew her. The discovery was the breakthrough the detectives needed. A direct link tying Danny to Sarah's disappearance. With this evidence in hand, the police obtained a warrant and arrived at Danny's home early in the morning on the April 22nd, 2013. When they informed him of the evidence and the charges against him, his initial defiance melted into despair. His shoulders slumped and his face lost its color as he realized that his secret had been uncovered. During his interrogation, Danny's anger and pain surfaced in bursts as he spoke of Sarah, his obsession, and the feeling of betrayal that had consumed him. Bit by bit, he confessed, revealing the dark web of jealousy, heartbreak, and rage that had driven him to murder. September 2014. The trial of Danny Russo became a spectacle in the town. The courtroom overflowed with people, all eager to witness the culmination of a story that had shaken the community to its core. Friends, family, and strangers watched in horror as the prosecution laid out the twisted tale of obsession and betrayal. Witness after witness testified, recounting the pain of those left behind. Jimmy's parents, once the epitome of wealth and stability, looked shattered as they sat in court, mourning a son taken from them in the prime of his life. Sarah's family, estranged yet devastated, tried to reconcile the memory of a loved one with the tragic end she met. As the evidence piled up, Danny's transformation from a troubled but hopeful young man to a murderer became clear. Psychologists testified about his mental state, describing how his obsessive attachment to Sarah had spiraled out of control, leading him to act in a moment of emotional chaos. The community, once sympathetic to Danny's struggles, now saw him as a tragic but dangerous figure, a reminder of the powerful, unpredictable force of unchecked emotions. When the verdict was finally delivered, finding Danny guilty of both murders, a heavy silence fell over the room. Danny sat motionless as the judge handed down his sentence, life without parole. He showed no outward reaction, but those close to him sensed the weight of what he had done settling over him, leaving him hollow. For the families, the verdict brought a semblance of closure, but it could never fully heal the wounds left by his actions. The community struggled to move on. The story of Danny Russo, Sarah Collins, and Jimmy Caldwell remained etched in the town's memory. A cautionary tale about the dangers of obsessive love and betrayal. It was a story that would be told and retold. A dark reminder of